Forget mini bars and room service. What if I told you that the most exclusive luxury hotels come with a chilling set of protocols for interacting with the dead? Tonight, I'm revealing the terrifying unspoken rules hotel staff must follow when they encounter the permanent, spectral residents of these grand establishments. Failure to comply has terrifying consequences that go far beyond a bad Yelp review. The Hotel Ethelgard does not exist on any travel app. You cannot book a room there through a third-party website, and if you walk past it on Fifth Avenue during the day, your eyes will likely slide right over its blackened brick facade, assuming it is just another overpriced apartment complex for the city's invisible elite. But at night, the Ethelgard breathes. That is the only way I can describe it. When the sun dips below the skyline and the frantic energy of New York City dulls to a low electric hum, the hotel wakes up. I needed the money. That is the classic start to every horror story, isn't it? I was drowning in student loans and the exorbitant rent of a shoebox apartment in Queens. When I saw the listing for a night auditor with a salary that dwarfed my previous yearly income, I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask why the interview was held at 3 a.m. I didn't ask why the hiring manager, a man named Mr. Holloway, whose skin looked like parchment stretched over wire, refused to shake my hand. I just signed the non-disclosure agreement, which was thicker than a phone book, and put on the uniform. The uniform was bespoke, midnight blue wool with gold buttons that felt heavy and cold. It fit perfectly, which was unsettling because I had never given them my measurements. My first shift began on a Tuesday, the deadest night of the week for the hospitality industry, or so I thought. The lobby of the Ethelgard is a cavernous expanse of marble and velvet. Crystal chandeliers hang from the ceiling like frozen explosions, casting fractured light onto the checkered floor. During the day, I assume it looks grand. At midnight, it looks like a mausoleum. Mr. Holloway stood behind the front desk, his posture rigid. He didn't look up as I approached. He was writing in a ledger, not a computer, but a massive leather-bound book with yellowed pages. The scratching of his fountain pen was the only sound in the entire building. The silence here is heavy. It presses against your eardrums, trying to force its way inside your head. "You are on time, Julian," Holloway said, his voice dry as dust. He finally looked up. His eyes were a milky, pale blue, devoid of warmth. "Punctuality is a survival trait here. I'm ready to learn the system, sir," I said, trying to sound confident. "Is it Oracle? Opera?" Holloway let out a sound that might have been a laugh, though it sounded more like a dry cough. "We do not use computers for the night audit, Julian. The electric currents, they disturb the guests. We use the ledger. And we use the manual." He reached under the counter and pulled out a binder. It wasn't standard office supply plastic. It was bound in a dark, textured material that felt suspiciously like skin, dyed a deep crimson. Embossed on the front in gold foil were the words, "Protocols for the Night Watch." "This," Holloway said, sliding the book toward me, "is your Bible. You will memorize it. You will not deviate from it. The day staff has their rules. Check-in times, luggage handling, concierge services. We have ours." I opened the binder. The first page didn't have a table of contents. It just had a list, handwritten in varying styles of ink, as if added to over decades by different people. Rule 1. The elevator to the 13th floor does not exist. If the dial stops on 13, do not get off. Do not look at the mirror in the cab. Press the lobby button until the door is close. If they do not close, apologize profusely. Rule 2. Room 404 is permanently occupied. Housekeeping does not clean it. Room service is to be left on the floor outside the door at 2:15 a.m. precisely. It must be a glass of brandy and a single raw steak. Do not knock. Rule 3. If you hear the piano playing in the ballroom, lock the front desk cage. Do not investigate. The ballroom has been sealed since 1928. I looked up at Holloway, a skeptical smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Is this a hazing thing? Like sending the new guy to find the breastplate stretcher?" Holloway's face didn't move. The temperature in the lobby seemed to drop 10 degrees in a second. The air conditioning vents rattled, a sudden, violent sound that echoed through the empty space. Disbelief is a luxury you cannot afford, Julian. The Guard has a history. It accumulates energy. Some guests check in and never check out. They pay in other ways, and they expect the service they are accustomed to. He walked out from behind the desk, his footsteps silent on the marble. I will be in the back office. The front desk is yours. Read the rules. Do not leave the desk unless the manual specifically instructs you to. And Julian, yes, if the phone rings and the caller ID says internal, basement, do not answer it. Let it ring until it stops. With that, he vanished into the shadows of the back office, leaving me alone in the oppressive grandeur of the lobby. I felt ridiculous. I was a grown man, a rational thinker, standing in a fancy hotel reading a book of ghost stories. I leaned back in the expensive ergonomic chair and scanned the lobby. It was empty. Just the gold, the velvet, and the shadows. I spent the first hour reading the manual. It was exhaustive. It detailed specific spectral archetypes. The weeping bride, the burned bellhop, the man in the gray suit. It gave instructions on what to do if the lights flickered in Morse code, hide under the desk, or if the smell of ozone suddenly filled the air, hold your breath, and close your eyes. It was elaborate fiction, surely. Then, the grandfather clock in the corner chimed 1 a.m. The sound was deafening, a deep, resonant bong that vibrated in my chest. As the final echo faded, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air grew thick, viscous. The smell of stale violets and rot wafted past my nose, subtle at first, then overpowering. I looked at the elevator bank across the lobby. There were 3 elevators. The indicator on the middle one lit up. Ding, floor 12. Ding, floor 11. Ding, floor 10. It was coming down. I checked the guest manifest in the ledger. According to Holloway's notes, we were at 20% occupancy. Most guests were on the lower floors. No one was checked into the upper penthouses. The elevator stopped at the lobby level. The door slid open with a smooth hiss. I waited for someone to walk out. A businessman stumbling in late, a couple returning from a gala. But there was no one. The cab was empty. The lights inside buzzed with a sickly yellow hue. Then I saw it. On the plush red carpet inside the elevator, footprints were appearing. They weren't wet footprints or muddy ones. They were depressions in the carpet, as if an invisible weight was pressing down, step by step, walking out of the elevator and into the lobby. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of heavy boots on marble, though there was nothing to see. The invisible walker moved toward the concierge desk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down at the manual, my hands trembling. I flipped the pages frantically. Invisible guests. Invisible guests. I found it on page 42. Protocol for the general? The general prefers to be acknowledged, but not seen. If he approaches the desk, stand up straight. Look at a point 3 feet above the counter. Do not make eye contact with the empty space. Ask him if he enjoyed his walk. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. The footsteps stopped right in front of the desk. The air in front of me shimmered like heat rising off asphalt, but it was freezing cold. A pen on the counter rolled to the edge and fell off, clattering loudly on the floor. Good evening, General. I managed to choke out, my voice cracking. I hope you enjoyed your walk. Silence. The kind of silence that screams. I stared at the wall behind the invisible presence, focusing on a painting of a fox hunt. I counted the heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Then a grunt. Low, guttural, and undeniably masculine. It didn't come from a throat. It came from the air itself. Adequate. The word hung there, vibrating. Then, the footsteps resumed, heavy and rhythmic, moving away from the desk toward the hallway leading to the bar. I watched the depressions in the carpet runners appear and vanish as the carpet fibers sprang back up. I sank back into the chair, gasping for air. It wasn't a prank. The physics of it, the carpet, the pen, the sound, It was impossible to fake. Holloway wasn't crazy. The manual wasn't a joke. I needed to quit. I needed to grab my bag and run out the front door and never look back. But as I reached for my backpack, the phone on the desk rang. The shrill trill cut through my panic. I looked at the display. Room 404. The room that wasn't supposed to be cleaned. The room that required a raw steak and brandy. I looked at the time. 1:15 a.m. The manual said the offering was due at 2:15 a.m. Why were they calling now? I remembered Holloway's warning about the basement, but he hadn't said anything about answering calls from the guests. In hospitality, the guest is God, even the dead ones. I picked up the receiver and held it to my ear. Front desk, this is Julian Static. White noise that sounded like wind howling through a tunnel. Then, a voice. It was wet, gurgling, like someone trying to speak with a mouth full of water. It's cold. I can adjust the thermostat for you, ma'am. I stammered, falling back on standard training. Is the heating not working in suite 404? Not the room, the voice wheezed. The girl, she's cold. Send him up. Send the boy? The boy? I asked. Ma'am, I'm the only one here. The boy in the blue suit with the gold buttons. I need his warmth. I froze. I was wearing the blue suit with gold buttons. The line went dead. I slammed the phone down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the desk. I looked at the manual again. Rule 2, room 404. Do not knock. It didn't say anything about entering. It didn't say anything about the guest demanding the staff. I grabbed the walkie-talkie to radio Holloway, but before I could press the button, the heavy oak door to the back office creaked open. Holloway stood there, half in shadow. He looked at me, then at the phone, then at me again. She called, didn't she? Holloway asked. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. She asked for me. I whispered. She said she needs my warmth. Holloway sighed, a dry, rattling sound. He walked over to the key rack behind the desk. He reached up and took down a heavy brass key with a faded tag that read 404. The manual is a guide, Julian, Holloway said softly. But sometimes the guests change the rules. If you do not go, she will come down here. And if she comes down here, she will bring the damp with her. The rot will spread to the lobby. We cannot have that. He placed the key on the counter. It felt like he was placing a loaded gun between us. You have to go up there, he said. Take the brandy. Take the steak. But Julian? I stared at him, my blood running cold. What? Do not let her touch you. If she touches you, she keeps you. I looked at the key, then at the elevator. The indicator light blinked. It was waiting on the lobby level. The doors were open. I was about to perform room service for a ghost who wanted to steal my body heat. And the worst part, I picked up the key. I picked up the key because the fear of what would happen if I didn't go was stronger than the fear of going. This was the Affleguard. You don't quit the Affleguard. You survive it, or you become part of the inventory. I walked to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. I found the brandy. I found the raw steak wrapped in butcher paper in the walk-in fridge. It dripped blood onto the white plate. Tray in hand, I approached the elevator. I stepped inside, careful not to look at the mirror, though that was a rule for the 13th floor, not this one. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors closed, sealing me in. The elevator began to ascend. Ding! Floor 2. Ding! Floor 3. The lights flickered. The elevator jerked to a halt. The lights died completely, plunging me into pitch blackness. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow. Then I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck. Not from the vent. From behind me. In the elevator that was supposed to be empty. Going up, A whisper said right in my ear. The light snapped back on. I spun around, nearly dropping the tray. The elevator was empty. Ding. Floor 4. The doors slid open. The hallway ahead was long, carpeted in deep crimson and lit by flickering sconces that cast long, dancing shadows. At the very end of the hall, one door stood different from the others. The wood was darker, warped as if by water damage. A puddle of dark liquid was seeping out from underneath the threshold. Room 404. I stepped out of the elevator. The air here was freezing, so cold I could see my breath misting in front of me. I walked down the hall, the plate with the raw steak trembling in my hand. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around. Run. Run now. But I kept walking. I reached the door. I could hear sobbing from the other side. A wet, tearing sound, like someone ripping wet cloth. I knelt down to place the tray on the floor, as per the rules. Click. The lock on the door disengaged. The handle turned slowly. I hadn't knocked. I hadn't touched the door. But it was opening, and as the gap widened, revealing the absolute darkness within, I realized the unspoken rules were about to change again. The door to room 404 didn't creak. It didn't groan. It simply glided inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing an abyss of darkness that seemed to swallow the dim light of the hallway. The cold that rolled out wasn't just temperature. It was a physical weight, heavy with the scent of brine, seaweed, and something sickly sweet like lilies left too long on a grave. I froze. My knees were locked, my hands gripping the silver tray so hard my knuckles turned white. The manual said, "Do not enter." The manual said, "Do not knock." But the manual hadn't said what to do when the door opens for you. From the darkness, the sound of weeping intensified. It wasn't the soft, mournful crying of a movie ghost. It was raw, ugly, wet sobbing. It sounded like someone drowning, gasping for air between guttural chokes. "You brought it," the voice bubbled up from the shadows. It sounded close. Too close. The warmth. "You brought the warmth." I couldn't see her, but I could hear the wet slap of bare feet on the hardwood floor of the suite. Slap, slap, slap. She was coming toward the door. She was coming for me. My brain finally rebooted. The primal instinct to survive overrode the paralyzing terror. Holloway's voice echoed in my head. "Do not let her touch you." I dropped to a crouch, hastily setting the tray on the carpet just outside the threshold. The brandy and the snifter sloshed, spilling a few amber drops onto the crimson wool. The raw steak sat there, an obscene red lump in the flickering light. Your service, ma'am," I stammered, scrambling backward. I didn't stand up. I crab-walked backward on my hands and feet, desperate to put distance between myself and that opening door. A hand emerged from the darkness. It wasn't a hand. It was a claw of pale, bloated flesh, the skin peeling away like wet paper. Long, jagged fingernails, blue with decay, reached out into the hallway light. They weren't reaching for the steak. They were reaching past the tray, groping blindly at the air where I had been standing a second ago. "Boy," she hissed. "Come inside." "The water is warm." I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back to see if she stepped out. I didn't wait for the elevator. I bolted for the stairwell door, threw it open, and took the stairs 2 at a time, my boots thundering against the concrete. I didn't stop until I burst back into the lobby, lungs burning, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Mr. Holloway was exactly where I had left him. He was polishing a brass bell with a gray rag, his expression unreadable. He looked up as I stumbled toward the desk, breathless and shaking. "Did you let her touch you?" he asked calmly, not breaking his rhythm. "No," I gasped, leaning against the marble counter for support. The door, it opened. She reached out. She wanted me to come in. Holloway stopped polishing. He set the bell down and looked at me with those milky, unsettling eyes. She always wants guests. Room 404 is a lonely place. It is an ocean of grief contained in 400 square feet. If you had crossed the threshold, Julian, you would have found yourself miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic. You would have drowned before your body hit the floor. He pushed the ledger toward me. Mark it down. Service delivered. 1:28 a.m. Anomaly. Door opened. Initial it. I stared at him. That's it? I almost died, and I just initial it. Welcome to the graveyard shift, Holloway said, his voice dropping to a whisper. This is your induction. You survived the first test. Most new hires quit after the phone call. A few quit after the elevator ride. You went up there. You came back. He reached under the counter and pulled out a thermos. He poured a cup of steaming, black coffee and slid it toward me. Drink. You need to ground yourself. The adrenaline crash will leave you vulnerable. I took the cup. The heat was comforting. Why? I asked, taking a sip. Why do they stay here? Why does this hotel allow it? We don't allow it, Julian. We manage it, Holloway corrected. The FL guard sits on a convergence of ley lines, a scar in the fabric of the city. We are not just a hotel. We are a container. A sanctuary for things that have nowhere else to go. And in exchange for our hospitality, they abide by the rules. Mostly. He tapped the thick manual that lay open on the desk. You need to finish reading. The night is young, and the bride is not the only resident who requires attention. I spent the next 2 hours huddled over the protocols for the night watch. Now that I knew the danger was real, the words on the page weren't just quirky fiction. They were survival instructions. I read with a desperate intensity. The manual was filled with marginalia. Notes scribbled in the columns by previous night auditors. Some were helpful, written in neat cursive. Others were frantic scrawls in bold marker. Page 12, section on laundry services. Protocol. If the laundry chute rumbles at 3 a.m., do not open it. Do not look down it. Handwritten note. It sounds like laughter. Don't listen. It's not laughter. It's the sound of bones tumbling. Page 25. Section on the grand ballroom. Protocol. The ballroom is strictly off limits. The doors are chained. Handwritten note. If you see lights under the door, put on your headphones. If you hear the waltz, hum something discordant. Disrupt the harmony. They hate jazz. It was a catalog of madness. But as I read, I began to see the pattern. The hotel operated on a system of respect and ritual. The entities weren't necessarily malicious. Well, not all of them. But they were bound by their own tragic loops. We were the stagehands ensuring their plays didn't spill over into the audience. Around 3:30 a.m., the lobby had settled into a heavy, oppressive silence. Holloway had retreated to the back office to file paperwork, leaving me alone at the helm. I was feeling a little more confident, or perhaps just numb, when I heard the luggage cart. The squeak of a rusty wheel. Squeak. Clack. Squeak. Clack. It was coming from the corridor leading to the service elevators. I looked up. Emerging from the shadows was a bellhop. He was wearing a uniform similar to mine, but it was tattered, covered in soot and burn marks. His cap was pulled low over his face. He was pushing a brass luggage cart piled high with vintage steamer trunks. The trunks were charred, the leather cracked and peeling. I froze. I remembered the manual. The burned bellhop. Protocol. He is helpful, but confused. He believes the fire of 1928 is still happening. Do not tell him the fire is out. Do not accept help with your bags. He pushed the cart toward the desk. As he got closer, I smelled it. The acrid stench of smoke and burning hair. It overpowered the lobby's usual smell of floor wax. Checking out, sir? The bellhop asked. His voice was raspy, like he had inhaled a lungful of ash. He didn't look up. I could see the skin on his jaw was blistered and red. I stood up, remembering the protocol. Treat them with respect. No, Arthur, I said, using the name listed in the manual. We are just moving these to storage. The guests are safe. He stopped pushing the cart. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were white wide with perpetual panic. The fire, sir, it's in the walls. I can hear it singing. I have to get the trunks out. Mrs. Van der Hoven needs her furs. The heat radiating off him was intense. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. You're doing a great job, Arthur, I said, keeping my voice steady. Take them to the service entrance. The fire trucks are waiting there. He nodded, a jerky, spasm-like motion. Right. Right. Service entrance. He turned the cart. Squeak. Clack. He pushed it toward the main doors. But just as he reached the revolving door, he vanished. The cart, the trunks, the smell of smoke, gone in the blink of an eye. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I checked the ledger. There was a section for him. Arthur's rounds. I marked the time. You handled him well. I jumped. Holloway was standing behind me again. He moved so silently it was unnatural. He's tragic, I said quietly. He thinks he's saving them. He saves us, Holloway said. As long as Arthur is patrolling, the fire stays in his memory. If he stops, well, let's just say the sprinkler system in this building hasn't been tested in 40 years. Holloway moved to the front of the desk and turned the guest book around. You are learning, Julian. But now we must discuss the most dangerous aspect of the job. The guests are one thing. They are bound to the hotel. But there are visitors. Visitors? Things that try to get in. Things that see the Guard as a beacon. He pointed to the glass entrance doors. Beyond them, the New York night was dark. The streetlights seemed dim, struggling to penetrate the gloom around the hotel entrance. The night shift is a siege, Julian. We keep the residents in, but we also keep the others out. That is why the doors are locked from midnight to 6. You must never unlock them. Not for the police. Not for a crying woman. Not for anyone who doesn't have a key card issued before 1950. Who has a key card from 1950? I asked. You'd be surprised, Holloway muttered. Just then, a heavy thud shook the glass of the front doors. I spun around. Pressed against the glass was a man. He was wearing a gray suit that looked damp. His face was pale, his eyes wide and pleading. He was mouthing words, banging his fist against the brass frame. Let me in. Please. It's cold. Sir, we're closed. I yelled instinctively, stepping forward. Holloway grabbed my arm. His grip was like a steel vise. Don't, he hissed. Look at his feet. I looked down. The glass doors were clear. I could see the sidewalk. The man had no feet. His legs ended in misty wisps that trailed into the concrete. And behind him, on the street, the shadows were moving. Writhing shapes, darker than the night, were inching toward him. He is a stray, Holloway said coldly. A wandering spirit trying to find sanctuary. If you let him in, those things behind him come in too. And they are not guests. They are parasites. The man on the glass screamed, a soundless, muffled cry that vibrated the pain. The shadows behind him lunged. He was pulled backward, dragged into the darkness of Fifth Avenue with violent speed. He vanished into the gloom. The street was empty again. I felt sick. We just let that happen? We protect the hotel, Holloway said, releasing my arm. That is the job. Empathy is a liability here. You cannot save everyone. You can only save the architecture. He walked back around the desk. I need to do a perimeter check of the basement. The boiler is acting up. You have the desk for the next hour. Remember the rules. Wait, I said, panic flaring again. The basement? You said not to answer calls from there. I am going to the physical basement, Holloway said. The call comes from the other basement, the one below the foundation. Do not answer the phone if it rings from sub-level 2. And Julian, yes? If the elevator dial starts spinning backwards, hide. He left me alone again. The lobby felt bigger now, the shadows longer. I tried to distract myself with the ledger, cross-referencing room numbers with spectral manifestations. It was 4:15 a.m. when I saw it. A small red ball rolled out from the dark corridor leading to the ballroom. It rolled slowly across the checkered floor, traversing the black and white tiles, coming to a stop right in front of my desk. I stared at it. It was a simple rubber ball, the kind kids play with in schoolyards. Then, a giggle echoed through the lobby. Light, airy, and terrifyingly innocent. Mister. I looked up. Standing near the ballroom entrance was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She wore a frilly party dress that looked like it was from the Victorian era, complete with a sash and patent leather shoes. She was holding a teddy bear that was missing an eye. My blood ran cold. I frantically flipped through the manual. The bride. The bellhop. The general. I scanned the index. There was no entry for a little girl. Mister, she called out again, taking a step forward. Can I have my ball back? I looked at the ball, then at her. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning swept over me. Rule 5. There are no children at the Aethelgard. If you see a child, it is not a child. Where are your parents? I asked, my voice trembling. I kept my hand near the alarm button under the desk. The one Holloway said was for extreme containment breaches. The girl smiled. It was too wide, too many teeth. Mommy is sleeping in the wall, she said sweetly. And Daddy is in the fireplace. I'm hungry, mister. She took another step. The lights in the lobby dimmed. The chandeliers overhead began to sway, chiming softly. We don't have food for little girls, I said, trying to sound authoritative. You should go back to your room. I don't have a room, she whispered. Her eyes, previously blue, were now turning entirely black, the pupils expanding to swallow the iris. I want to play. Do you want to play hide and seek? She didn't wait for an answer. She dropped the teddy bear. It hit the floor with a wet thud like a piece of raw meat. I'll count, she giggled. She covered her eyes with her small hands. 1, 2. The air pressure in the room dropped. My ears popped. The shadows around the pillars began to stretch toward me like grasping fingers. 3, 4. I looked at the manual. Nothing. No protocol. I was off the map. Holloway was in the basement. I was alone with a predator wearing the skin of a child. 5, 6. I remembered the note in the margin about the ballroom. Disrupt the harmony. The girl was counting faster now, her voice distorting, becoming deeper, layering over itself like a demonic chorus. 7, 8. I grabbed the heavy brass bell from the counter. I didn't ring it. I threw it. I threw it as hard as I could across the lobby toward the far wall, away from her. It smashed into a marble pillar with a deafening clang. The counting stopped. The girl lowered her hands. Her face was contorted in rage. She looked at the bell, then at me. That wasn't part of the game, she hissed. And then the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the tension like a knife. I risked a glance at the caller ID, praying it wasn't the basement. Room 666. There was no room 666. The hotel only went up to the 14th floor. The girl screamed, a high-pitched shriek that shattered the glass vase on the concierge desk. She dissolved into a swarm of black moths that scattered into the air and vanished into the vents. The lobby was empty again, save for the rolling red ball and the ringing phone. I stared at the phone. It kept ringing. Ring. 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 I knew I shouldn't answer it. I knew it was a trap. But the manual, which had fallen open on the floor when the girl screamed, was fluttering. A draft from nowhere was turning the pages. It stopped on the very last page, a page I hadn't seen before. Protocol for the penthouse room 666. When the master calls, you answer. If you do not answer, he comes down. I reached for the phone. My hand shook so badly I fumbled the receiver twice. I brought it to my ear. Front desk, I whispered. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as liquid nitrogen, spoke. Julian, you have broken a rule. There are no games allowed in the lobby. I think it is time we discussed your penalties. The voice on the other end of the line was not loud. It didn't need to be. It possessed the kind of quiet, crushing authority that makes tectonic plates shift. It was a voice that tasted of cold iron and expensive cognac. Penalties, the voice repeated, savoring the word. Balance must be maintained. Julian, you disrupted the lobby's equilibrium. You threw a bell. Crude. Effective against the imposter child, yes, but crude. You have disturbed the dust. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. I was defending myself. The manual didn't cover, whatever that was. The manual is a map, not the territory, the voice replied smoothly. I am Mr. Sterling, the proprietor, and because you have rattled the cage, you must now secure the locks. The disturbances in the lobby have caused a sympathetic vibration on the 8th floor. A Do Not Disturb sign has fallen from room 815. You will replace it immediately. The 8th floor? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I looked at the surveillance monitors under the desk. The screen for the 8th floor was nothing but static. Do not fail, Julian. If that door remains unwarded for another 10 minutes, the guest inside will realize they are no longer confined. And trust me, the guest in 815 makes the weeping bride look like a nun. The line clicked dead. I stood there for a moment, the receiver humming with dial tone in my hand. The lobby was silent again, but the air felt charged, brittle, as if the slightest movement would shatter reality like a pane of glass. Holloway emerged from the back office. He looked ragged. His uniform was dusty, and there was a smear of black grease on his cheek. He saw my face and stopped. "Who called?" he asked, though I think he already knew. "Mr. Sterling," I said. He said a sign fell on the 8th floor. Room 815. Holloway's face went pale, a feat I hadn't thought possible given his already cadaverous complexion. He rushed to a cabinet behind the desk, a cabinet secured with a heavy padlock. He dialed in a combination, his fingers moving in a blur, and threw the doors open. Inside hung a collection of door hangers. These weren't the flimsy cardboard signs you see in a Marriott. These were heavy slabs of material. Some were made of lead, others of charred wood, others of woven hair. He grabbed one made of heavy, tarnished silver, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. "Take this," Holloway ordered, shoving the heavy metal rectangle into my hands. It was cold enough to burn my skin. "Go." Now, the service elevator. What's in 815? I asked, following him as he practically shoved me toward the service corridor. "We don't talk about the occupants," Holloway hissed. "We only talk about the containment. The Do Not Disturb signs in this hotel are not requests for privacy, Julian. They are seals. They are the only thing keeping the nightmares in their designated suites. If the seal is broken, the nightmare bleeds out." He hit the call button for the service elevator. "When you get to the door, do not look inside. Even if you hear your mother's voice, even if you hear God himself, you hang the sign on the knob, you knock once to affirm the boundary, and you leave." The elevator arrived. It was an industrial cage smelling of oil and old copper. I stepped in. Holloway didn't follow. "Good luck," he whispered. The door slammed shut like the lid of a coffin. As the elevator rattled upward, I examined the silver sign in my hands. The etching was deep, the grooves filled with a dark, dried substance that looked suspiciously like blood. The words "non-turbaire" were stamped in the center. "Do not disturb." The elevator jolted to a halt at the 8th floor. The doors rattled open. The hallway was different here. The carpet wasn't red. It was a deep, bruising purple. The sconces on the walls were dim, casting pools of yellow light that barely reached the floor. But the silence was the worst part. It wasn't empty silence. It was the silence of a held breath. I stepped out, the floorboards groaning under my boots. I walked down the corridor, counting the numbers. 801, 803, 805. As I passed the rooms, I noticed the signs on the other doors. Room 809 had a sign made of driftwood wrapped in seaweed. Room 812 had a sign that looked like a dried animal skin stretched over a frame. Each one was unique, tailored to the specific horror trapped within. Then I saw room 815. It was at the end of the hall. The door was dark oak, and there on the carpet in front of it lay the silver sign. It had fallen face down. The door was cracked open, just a fraction of an inch, a sliver of darkness visible between the door and the jamb. I stopped 10 feet away. The air around the door was vibrating. I could feel it in my teeth. A low, thrumming sound emanated from the crack, like a massive generator humming underground. I forced my legs to move. Just hang the sign. Just hang the sign. I reached the door. I crouched down to pick up the fallen sign, my eyes fixed on the gap in the door. From inside the room, a voice spoke. It wasn't a monster's growl. It was a pleasant, conversational tone. A man's voice. "Is that you? Room service? I've been waiting for the turndown." I froze. The voice sounded normal. Too normal. I seemed to have spilled my wine. The voice continued. "Could you come in and help me with the stain? It's spreading." I grabbed the fallen sign. It was hot now, searingly hot. I stood up, holding the replacement sign Holloway had given me in one hand and the fallen one in the other. I have your new indicator, sir," I managed to say, my voice trembling. The door creaked. The gap widened by another inch. "I don't need a sign," the voice said, dropping an octave. "I need company. It's so boring in here. We have so much to discuss. Your future, for instance." It looks brief. A finger curled around the edge of the door. It was long, impossibly long, with too many knuckles. It beckoned me. I squeezed my eyes shut, remembering Holloway's order. "Do not look inside." I lunged forward. I slammed the heavy silver sign onto the door handle. Clang. The moment the metal touched the wood, a shockwave blasted through the hallway. It knocked me backward off my feet. I hit the floor hard, sliding across the purple carpet. The door slammed shut with the force of a gunshot. The humming stopped instantly. The finger was gone. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air. The sign hung perfectly on the knob, glowing with a faint blue luminescence. The seal was restored. I scrambled to my feet and didn't look back until I was in the elevator. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I looked at the palm of my hand where I had held the sign. The metal was cool now, but the imprint of the letters, non-turbaire, was branded into my skin, red and angry. When I returned to the lobby, Holloway was waiting with a bottle of antiseptic and a bandage. He didn't say a word as he dressed the burn on my hand. "You did it," he finally said, taping the gauze down. "You resealed the breach. What was in there?" I asked, watching the red soak through the white bandage. "Something that feeds on conversation," Holloway said. "It lures you in with pleasantries. Then it keeps you talking. For eternity. It eats your words until you have no mind left." He capped the antiseptic. "But the night is not over, Julian. You have survived the breach, but now we must attend to the routine maintenance. You've seen the containment. Now you must learn the service." He opened the manual to a section I hadn't read yet. "Room service for the departed. Not all guests are monsters," Holloway explained, his tone shifting to something almost respectful. "Some are simply echo loops, residual hauntings. They are harmless, provided they are kept in their routine. If the routine breaks, they become confused. Confusion leads to anger. Anger leads to structural damage." He pointed to an entry, Suite 202. The Critic. Protocol. The Critic requires a fresh pot of Earl Grey tea, exactly 210 degrees Fahrenheit, and a copy of the New York Times from February 14th, 1952. The paper must be ironed. Leave the tray on the side table. Do not walk between the chair and the television. We have a stash of old newspapers in the basement archives, Holloway said. You will prepare the tray. You will take it up. And you will be the perfect waiter. The kitchen was quiet. I brewed the tea, checking the temperature with a laser thermometer. 210 degrees on the dot. I found the newspaper where Holloway said it would be. Preserved in a plastic sleeve, I ironed it carefully on the prep table, smoothing out the creases of history. It felt absurd. I was a 21st century guy ironing a 70-year-old newspaper for a ghost. But the burn on my hand throbbed, a reminder that the absurdity was lethal. I took the service elevator to the second floor. Suite 202. I knocked 3 times. Room service. I announced clearly. No answer. That was standard. I used the passkey and entered. The room smelled of stale tobacco and old spice. The television was on, a massive, boxy CRT model from the 90s, displaying nothing but static. In the armchair facing the TV sat a figure. He was translucent, a collection of gray smoke held together by will. He wore a smoking jacket. I could see the back of the chair through his chest. I took a deep breath and walked into the room. Do not walk between the chair and the television. I hugged the wall, moving in a wide arc around the room. The static on the TV hissed, a sound that seemed to bore into my skull. Your tea, sir, I whispered, placing the tray on the side table. I set the iron newspaper down next to it. The figure didn't move. But as I pulled my hand away, the smoke shifted. A face formed in the haze. Sharp features, a monocle, a mouth set in a permanent sneer. He leaned toward the tea. He inhaled. Too much bergamot, a voice whispered in my mind. It wasn't auditory. It was telepathic, but acceptable. I bowed slightly, backing away. Is there anything else, sir? The figure turned its head slowly. The empty sockets where I should have been bored into me. The review. The voice echoed in my head. They didn't print my review. Tell the editor. Tell him I will burn the press down if my words are cut. I will relay the message, sir, I said, hitting the perfect note of deference. I backed out of the room and closed the door. My heart rate was steadying. I was getting the hang of this. It was just a job, a terrifying, high-stakes job, but a job nonetheless. Identify the need, fulfill the protocol, survive. I returned to the lobby feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. I had sealed a demon and served a ghost. I was a night auditor of the Ethelgard, but the hotel, it seemed, didn't like hubris. As I walked back to the front desk, I noticed something wrong. The lobby floor is a black and white checkerboard, but near the grand entrance, the pattern was disrupted. A single white tile was bleeding. A dark, viscous liquid was welling up from the grout, spreading slowly across the pristine marble. I walked closer. It wasn't oil. It was ink. Thick, black ink. And then I saw the footprints. They weren't invisible this time. They were made of the ink. They led from the front door, which was still locked, toward the elevators. But they didn't look like human footprints. They were cloven, hoof prints. Holloway? I called out, my voice echoing in the vast space. No answer. The office door was closed. I followed the trail of ink. It went past the elevators. It went past the bar. It led directly to the manager's office. Not the back office where Holloway worked. The real manager's office. The one with the gold plaque that read Mr. Sterling. The one that had been locked for 50 years. The door to Mr. Sterling's office was wide open. A cold wind blew from inside, carrying the scent of sulfur and burning paper. I approached cautiously. The manual didn't have a section for the manager's office. It was implied that we never, ever went there. I peered inside. The office was an opulent study, lined with books bound in human skin. And sitting behind the massive mahogany desk was not a man. It was Holloway. but he wasn't wearing his uniform. He was tied to the chair with barbed wire. His mouth was gagged with a piece of black velvet. His eyes were wide with terror. And standing over him, holding a fountain pen that dripped the black ink onto the floor, was a tall, slender figure in a suit that seemed to be made of shadows stitched together. The figure turned to face me. It had no face, just a smooth, white surface like a porcelain mask. Employee evaluation, the figure said. The voice was the same one from the phone. Mr. Sterling, the proprietor. You have shown promise, Julian, but now we must test your loyalty. Holloway has become inefficient. He let the boiler pressure drop. He let the bellhop wander too far. He is being retired. The figure raised the pen. It wasn't just a pen. The nib was a sharp, glimmering blade. The position of senior concierge is opening up, Sterling said. Pick up the letter opener on the desk, Julian. Finish the retirement, and the promotion is yours. Refuse, and you become part of the structure. I believe we need a new support beam in the basement. I looked at Holloway, was shaking his head frantically, his eyes begging me. I looked at the letter opener. It was silver, shaped like a dagger. I looked at the faceless entity. I realized then that the unspoken rules weren't just about keeping ghosts in check. They were about how the hotel fed itself. It didn't just eat guests. It ate staff. I took a step into the room. I reached for the letter opener. My hand closed around the cold metal handle. I'll do it, I said, my voice flat. Sterling nodded, the porcelain mask tilting in approval. Excellent. Ambition is a currency here. I walked around the desk. I stood over Holloway. I raised the dagger. And then I turned and drove the blade down. Not into Holloway, but into the ledger that sat open on the desk in front of him. The book that Holloway had said contained the soul of the hotel operations. I stabbed the blade right through the spine of the book. A scream tore through the room. Not from Holloway, not from Sterling, but from the walls themselves. The chandeliers shattered. The ink on the floor began to boil. Sterling roared, a sound of grinding metal. You violate the contract. I'm rewriting it. I yelled over the noise. I grabbed the knife, ripped it from the book, and sliced the ropes binding Holloway. Run, I screamed. But as Holloway stumbled to his feet, the floor beneath us dissolved. The ink expanded, turning into a whirlpool of blackness. We weren't running out of the office. We were falling. Falling into the sub-basement. Falling into the guts of the Ethelgard. The last thing I saw was the faceless figure leaning over the edge of the abyss, watching us fall, the porcelain mask cracking down the center to reveal a maw of jagged teeth beneath. Shift change, it hissed. The fall didn't end with a bone-shattering crunch. It ended with a wet, suffocating squelch. I gasped, sucking in air that tasted of copper and ancient dust, and thrashed blindly in the dark. I wasn't buried in earth. I was submerged in a pile of what felt like damp, rotting fabric. My hands clawed at the mass, finding buttons, zippers, and stiff collars. It wasn't just trash. It was clothing. Thousands of suits, dresses, uniforms, and coats, all discarded, all reeking of the people who had once worn them. Holloway. I screamed, my voice muffled by the mountain of textiles. Over here, a weak voice croaked from somewhere to my left. I dug myself out, scrambling over a mound of moth-eaten velvet, and tumbled onto a hard, cold floor. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight, until a soft, rhythmic pulsing began to illuminate the space. The light wasn't coming from bulbs, it was emanating from the walls themselves. Veins of bioluminescent mold pulsing with a sickly green hue. We were in the bowels of the Ethelgard. The architecture here had abandoned the pretense of luxury. The walls were rough-hewn bedrock, slick with moisture. Overhead, massive pipes hissed and groaned, carrying fluids that sounded too thick to be water. I found Holloway slumped against a rusted support beam. He looked smaller down here, stripped of the authority the lobby gave him. His uniform was torn, and blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, mixing with the grime on his face. You stabbed the ledger. Holloway wheezed, looking up at me with a mixture of horror and awe. In 50 years, no one has ever dared to damage the book. It was that or watch you get retired, I said, reaching down to help him up. Where are we? This doesn't look like the basement. This is the sublevel, Holloway said, grimacing as he got to his feet. The foundation, the digesting tract. Whatever you want to call it. This is where the hotel keeps what it consumes. He gestured to the mountain of clothes we had fallen into, the personal effects of guests who checked out prematurely, and staff who didn't make the cut. I looked back at the pile. A child's shoe poked out from the top. I felt bile rise in my throat. We need to get back up, I said, my voice tight. Sterling is going to come for us. Sterling doesn't come down here. Holloway said, limping forward. He is the brain. He stays in the penthouse. Down here belong to the archivists, and they don't like noise. Keep your voice down. We moved through the tunnel, the floor uneven and slick with a black, oily substance, the same ink I had seen in the office. It acted as a trail, leading us deeper into the labyrinth. The air grew colder, but it wasn't a natural chill. It was the zero-point energy of the grave. After what felt like miles of walking, the tunnel opened up into a cavernous chamber that stretched up into the darkness. Rows upon rows of towering metal filing cabinets lined the space, creating a maze of steel canyons. They were rusted, covered in the same green moss as the walls. The archives, Holloway whispered. Case files from the crypt. Everything that happens above is recorded here below. Every scream, every nightmare, every drop of blood. I walked to the nearest cabinet. The label on the drawer was handwritten in elegant, archaic script. Room 404, 1920 to present. I hesitated, then pulled the drawer open. It didn't squeak. It groaned like a dying animal. Inside were thick folders. I pulled one out at random. Subject, Eleanor Vance. Check-in, June 4th, 1954. Status, permanent resident. I opened the file. It wasn't just paper. Pinned to the pages were locks of hair, dried flowers, and photographs that seemed to move when I tilted them. I read the summary. Protocol breach. Guest attempted to leave after midnight. Intercepted by the elevator mechanism. Consciousness separated from somatic vessel. Reassigned to Suite 404 as the Weeping Bride. Function, siren. Lures empathy-driven staff to the threshold. I slammed the folder shut. It's all engineered, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The ghosts. They aren't just haunting the place. The hotel made them. It assigns them roles. Holloway nodded solemnly. The Aethelguard is a machine, Julian. A machine that runs on tragedy. It needs these archetypes to generate the energy that sustains it. The Weeping Bride, the burned bellhop, the man in the window, they are batteries. And we, the Night Watch. We are the technicians ensuring the batteries don't leak. I moved down the row. Room 13. I pulled the file. Subject, the void. Origin, 1902 ritual. Status, unstable. Manifests as extreme cold spots. Absorbs heat and light. Feeding schedule, weekly. Feeding schedule? I asked, looking at Holloway. Why do you think the heating bills are so high? Holloway muttered. We pump excess energy into that room just to keep it from expanding and swallowing the whole floor. But look for the staff files. That's what you need to see. I ran to the section labeled Personnel. I flipped through the tabs. G. H. Holloway. Thomas. I pulled the file. It was thick, inches deep. I opened the first page. A black and white photo of a young man, fresh-faced and smiling, stared back at me. The date was October 12th, 1928. 1928. I stared at Holloway. You said you'd been here 50 years. That's nearly a century. Holloway looked away, shame etched into his features. Time works differently when you sign the contract, Julian. I haven't aged since the day I took the job. I sold my mortality for a steady paycheck and a sense of purpose. I thought I was the warden. I didn't realize I was just another prisoner until tonight. I flipped to the end of his file. The last entry was dated today. Status: compromised. Efficiency degrading. Recommendation: termination and structural assimilation. Structural assimilation, I repeated. Sterling said he needed a new support beam. He meant literally, Holloway said. They encase you in the foundation. You become part of the masonry. You hold the building up for eternity, conscious but immobile. I dropped the file. My hands were shaking. I looked at the next drawer. T. Thorne, Julian. I didn't want to look. I had to look. I pulled the file. It was thin. Just a single page. Subject: Julian Thorne. Check in. Tuesday. Trait: high empathy/resilience. Potential: proprietor vessel. Proprietor vessel. I asked, "What does that mean?" Holloway's eyes widened. He stepped back, looking at me as if I had just grown a second head. Sterling. Sterling isn't a person, Julian. He's a suit. He's a construct. The entity that runs this hotel needs a human host to interact with the physical world. The current vessel, the one we call Sterling, is wearing out. That's why he's wearing a mask. His face is gone. He wants me to replace him. I felt the blood drain from my face. He wants your body, Holloway corrected. He wants to hollow you out and wear you like a winter coat. That's why you are hired. That's why you survived the night. It was an audition. Before I could process the horror of that statement, a sound echoed through the archives. It was the sound of metal screeching against metal. Scree. We spun around. At the far end of the aisle, a figure was emerging from the shadows. It wasn't Sterling. It was something worse. It was a conglomeration of office supplies and human limbs. Its torso was made of bound ledgers. Its legs were filing cabinet drawers articulated like insect limbs, and its head was a typewriter. Ribbons of red ink trailed from its mouth like drool. The auditor, Holloway whispered. The guardian of the archives. It deletes errors. The typewriter head clacked violently. Ding. A sheet of paper spooled out of its mouth. Error detected. Unauthorized access. Deletion imminent. The creature surged forward, its metal legs clicking rapidly on the stone floor. It moved with terrifying speed. Run, I yelled. We bolted down the aisle, turning sharp corners through the maze of cabinets. Behind us, the sound of crashing metal and the furious clacking of keys grew louder. Drawers were being ripped open as the creature barreled through them, sending showers of paper into the air. Where are we going? I shouted. The boiler room? Holloway yelled back. There's a maintenance shaft behind the furnace. It leads to the elevator core. We burst out of the archive section and into a hot, humid corridor. The air here smelled of sulfur and burning hair. The temperature spiked drastically. We were nearing the heart of the beast. The boiler room was a cathedral of industry. In the center stood the furnace, a massive iron beast the size of a locomotive. But there was no coal. The door to the firebox was glass, and inside, a swirling vortex of blue and white fire roared. Faces. Hundreds of screaming, silent faces, churned within the flames. Don't look at the fire, Holloway warned, grabbing my shoulder and steering me toward the back of the room. It mesmerizes you. The auditor burst into the room behind us. It skidded on the oily floor, its typewriter head swiveling toward us. Clack, 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 ding. It raised a limb made of sharpened fountain pens and lunged. Get to the shaft, Holloway shouted. He stopped running. He turned to face the monster. What are you doing? I screamed, stopping at the ladder that led up to a dark hatch. I'm resigning, Holloway roared. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key ring, the master keys to the hotel. He didn't use them as a weapon. He threw them. He threw them straight at the glass door of the furnace. The keys hit the glass with a ping. The glass cracked. The blue fire inside roared, sensing a breach. The crack spiderwebbed. The auditor hesitated. It calculated the risk. Risk assessment. Critical. Holloway grabbed a heavy iron shovel leaning against the wall and swung it with all his might at the cracked glass. Smash. The containment failed. The fire exploded outward, a wave of screaming blue energy. It didn't burn like normal fire. It hit with physical force. It slammed into the auditor, melting the filing cabinets that made up its legs, fusing the typewriter keys into a molten lump. The creature shrieked, a sound of digital corruption and grinding gears. Holloway was thrown backward by the blast, sliding across the floor. Holloway. I scrambled down the ladder, ignoring the heat that was singeing my eyebrows. I grabbed him by the collar of his ruined uniform and dragged him toward the shaft. The blue fire was swirling around the room, consuming everything it touched, turning steel to slag. We practically fell into the maintenance shaft, slamming the heavy iron hatch shut above us just as the fire licked at our heels. The metal of the hatch turned red hot instantly. We were in a cramped vertical tunnel, clinging to rusted rungs. Below us, the inferno raged. Above us, the shaft extended into darkness. "You crazy old bastard," I panted, coughing up smoke. "You blew up the boiler." Holloway was laughing. It was a wheezing, painful sound, but it was laughter. I always wanted to do that. The heating system in this place was a disaster anyway. He looked up at me, his face illuminated by the red glow of the hatch below. "The energy release, it will disrupt the containment fields on the upper floors. The guests will be loose. Sterling will be distracted trying to maintain order. This is your chance, Julian." "Our chance," I corrected. "No." Holloway shook his head. He looked at his legs. I followed his gaze. Where the blue fire had touched his boots, the leather was gone, and his feet, they were turning to stone. Gray, granite creeping up his shins. "The assimilation," he whispered. "It's started." Sterling activated the claws. "I can't leave the Foundation, Julian. I am becoming the Foundation. I'm not leaving you," I said, gripping his arm. "You have to." Holloway said, his voice firm. "You saw the file. You are the vessel. If Sterling catches you, he wins. He resets the cycle. He gets a new body, and the hotel feeds for another 100 years. You have to get to the penthouse. You have to destroy the original contract. It's the only way to kill him." "Where is it?" "Room 666, Holloway said. "The room that doesn't exist. You have to force the elevator to take you there. Remember the rule about the 13th floor? The mirror? Yes. Break the mirror in the elevator on the 13th floor. That's the gateway. The penthouse is behind the reflection." The stone had reached his knees. He couldn't move his legs anymore. He anchored himself to the ladder rungs with his arms. "Go, Julian. The fire is rising." I looked at him one last time. The man who had been a cog in the machine for a century, finally breaking the gears. "I'll fire him for you," I promised. "Give him hell." Holloway grinned. I climbed. I climbed until my muscles burned and my hands bled. Below me, the red glow faded, swallowed by the darkness of the shaft, but the sound of the boiler room collapsing echoed up the tunnel. I reached the top of the shaft. A service grate. I kicked it open and pulled myself out. I was back in the lobby. But it wasn't the silent, oppressive lobby I had left. It was chaos. The disruption in the boiler room had shattered the seals. The do not disturb signs were useless. The lobby was full. The weeping bride was floating near the ceiling, her tears raining down like acid, sizzling on the marble floor. The burned bellhop was running in circles, his cart engulfed in phantom flames, screaming about the luggage. The man from room 815, the one who feeds on conversation, was cornering a terrified delivery driver who had chosen the worst possible night to drop off a package, whispering madness into the poor man's ear. And in the center of it all, standing by the elevators, was the little girl with the red ball. She wasn't playing hide and seek anymore. She was 10 feet tall, a shadow puppet made of nightmares, swiping at the chandeliers. I stood up, gripping the letter opener I had stolen from Sterling's office, the only weapon I had left. The elevator bank was across the lobby. Between me and the gateway to the penthouse was a legion of the damned, finally off their leashes. I checked my watch. 5:15 a.m. Dawn was coming. But in the Athelgard, The night is always longest just before the end. I stepped out from behind the pillar. Hey, I shouted, my voice cutting through the cacophony of screams and wails. Every spectral head turned toward me. The bride hissed. The bellhop stopped running. The shadow girl lowered her gaze. I'm the acting manager, I yelled, holding up the letter opener like a talisman. And I have some complaints about the noise. For a second, there was silence. Then they surged toward me. I didn't fight. I ran. I sprinted for the center elevator, the one I had used for my first spectral encounter. I dodged a spectral hand that tried to freeze my heart. I slid under the bellhop's burning cart. I vaulted over the growing puddle of ink on the floor. I hit the call button. Ding. The doors opened instantly. I threw myself inside and slammed the closed door button just as the shadow girl's claws raked across the metal doors. I was safe. For a moment, I looked at the control panel. There was no button for 666. There was no button for the penthouse. I pressed 13. The elevator ascended. My reflection in the mirror on the back wall looked ragged. My uniform was shredded, my face smeared with soot and blood. But my eyes were different. They weren't the eyes of a broke college student anymore. They were the eyes of a hunter. Ding. Floor 13. The elevator stopped. The doors didn't open. This was the floor that didn't exist. I turned to the mirror. Behind the reflection, Holloway had said. I gripped the silver letter opener. I looked at myself. And then, with a primal scream, I drove the handle of the opener into the glass. Crack! The mirror didn't just break. It shattered outward. But no shards fell to the floor. Instead, the cracks glowed with a blinding white light. A wind howled from the mirror, pulling me in. I didn't resist. I stepped through the broken frame into the white light, into the space behind the glass. I was going to the penthouse. I was going to see the manager. Stepping through the mirror was not like breaking through glass. It was like plunging into a frozen lake. The cold shock seized my lungs, stealing the scream that was building in my throat. For a moment, there was no sound, no light, only the crushing pressure of absolute nothingness. Then, gravity inverted. I slammed onto a surface that should have been a ceiling, gasping for air that tasted of ozone and ancient, dried blood. I scrambled to my feet, the silver letter opener still gripped tightly in my hand. I was standing in the penthouse. But this wasn't a room designed for human habitation. The architecture was non-Euclidean, a dizzying array of angles that hurt the eyes to look at directly. The walls were made of obsidian glass, offering a panoramic view not of New York City, but of a swirling, tempestuous void where lightning struck silently against purple clouds. Below, far below, I could see the grid of Manhattan, but it looked like a circuit board, burning with a sickly green fire. Welcome to the executive suite, Julian. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I spun around. In the center of the room, sitting on a throne made of interwoven gold and bone, was the figure I knew as Mr. Sterling. But he had shed his pretenses. The suit was gone, replaced by a skin that looked like polished marble, cracked and leaking liquid light. The porcelain mask lay shattered on the floor, revealing a face that was a void of swirling static, like a detuned television channel. You are late, the entity said, but you are here. That is what matters. I'm not here to join you. I spat, holding the dagger out. I'm here to fire you. Sterling stood up. He was tall, impossibly tall, his limbs elongating as he moved. Fire me? I am the Ethelgard. I am the mortar between the bricks. I am the reason the water runs and the lights stay on. Do you think this is a business? This is a metabolic process. And you are the new heart. He gestured to a pedestal behind him. On it lay a massive, pulsating object. It looked like a book, but it heaved with every breath I took. It was bound in something that looked disturbingly like human skin, stitched together with gold thread. The contract, Sterling hissed. The original deed. Sign it, Julian. Sign it, and the debt is paid. Your student loans? Gone. Your fear? Gone. You will live forever within these walls. You will be the master of the house, not the servant. The psychological toll of the night crashed down on me. My body was screaming in pain, my mind fracturing from the horrors I had witnessed. The offer was seductive. To stop running, to stop being afraid, to have power over the things that had hunted me in the lobby. And Holloway, I asked, my voice trembling. What happens to him? He is the foundation now. Sterling, dismissed. He serves his purpose. We all have our roles. Yours is to lead. Mine is to rest. I have worn this hotel for a century. I am tired, Julian. Give me your flesh and take my power. I looked at the book. I looked at the void where Sterling's space should be. I remembered Holloway's legs turning to stone, his final grin as he blew up the boiler. He hadn't fought to make me the boss. He fought to break the cycle. The manual says the guest is always right, I whispered, stepping toward the pedestal. Sterling's static face seemed to brighten. Yes, exactly. But, I continued, raising the letter opener, it also says that disruptive guests will be evicted. I didn't lunge for Sterling. I lunged for the book. Sterling roared, a sound that shattered the obsidian windows. No. He moved faster than thought, a blur of marble and light. A hand like a vice clamped around my throat, lifting me off the ground. The cold was agonizing. I could feel my life force draining away, sucked into the void of his touch. You ungrateful parasite. Sterling shrieked, the static on his face turning red. I offered you godhood. Now you will be nothing but wet mortar. My vision blurred. I kicked uselessly, my boots scuffing against his marble shins. I was dying. I was becoming just another cold spot in room 13. But then I felt it. The burn on my hand, the imprint of the Do Not Disturb sign from the 8th floor. It throbbed with a searing heat. Holloway had said the silver sign was a seal, a barrier against the things that feed on conversation, on will. I prioritized survival over dignity. I let go of the letter opener with my left hand and slammed my branded right palm directly into the center of Sterling's static face. Non-Turbear. The effect was instantaneous. The seal flared with blue light. Sterling shrieked. A sound of digital corruption and tearing metal. He dropped me. He stumbled back, clawing at his face, where the imprint of the seal was burning into his essence, disrupting his form. You disturbed the manager. He glitched, his voice fragmenting. I hit the floor, gasping for air. I scrambled for the letter opener. The book was right there, the contract. I reached the pedestal. The book was warm, feverish. I didn't open it. I raised the silver dagger, aiming for the center of the binding. This is for the night shift, I yelled. I drove the blade down. It didn't feel like stabbing paper. It felt like stabbing a living heart. The blade sank deep, burying itself to the hilt, a geyser of black ink. The lifeblood of the Ethelgard erupted from the wound, spraying over me, coating my face, my hands, the floor. The room screamed. The walls cracked. The obsidian glass shattered, letting the howling wind of the void rush in. Sterling fell to his knees. His marble skin began to gray, to crumble. You fool, he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on pavement. If you destroy the contract, who will keep them in? I guess I'll have to write some new rules, I panted, wiping the black ink from my eyes. Sterling disintegrated. He didn't explode. He simply turned to dust, a pile of gray ash that was immediately swept away by the wind. The room began to dissolve. The floor fell away. I was falling again, but this time it wasn't into darkness. It was into light, a blinding, white morning light. I woke up on the floor of the lobby. My face was pressed against the cold marble checkerboard. I groaned, rolling over. My entire body felt like one giant bruise. I blinked against the harsh sunlight streaming through the revolving doors. Sunlight. Real, natural sunlight. I sat up. The lobby was pristine. The chandelier was intact. The "Do Not Disturb" sign I had replaced on the 8th floor was gone from my memory of the night. But the burn on my hand was still there, a faint, pink scar. I looked at the front desk. Mr. Holloway was not there. I pulled myself up, limping toward the desk. The ledger lay open. The damage I had done to it, the hole I had stabbed through the spine, was gone. The pages were smooth and crisp. But there was a new entry. Date, October 31st. Night Auditor, Julian Thorne. Status, permanent. I stared at the words. Permanent. Good morning, sir. I jumped, spinning around. A young woman stood there. She was wearing a maid's uniform, crisp and clean. She held a feathered duster. She looked normal, human. We need to clear the lobby, she said pleasantly. The guests will be checking out soon. Where is Mr. Holloway? I asked, my voice raspy. The maid paused. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, then it smoothed over. Mr. Holloway. Oh, you mean the statue in the basement? It's always been there, sir. Part of the original foundation. I felt a chill that the sunlight couldn't touch. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the basement. The boiler room was cold. The furnace was dark. But in the center of the room, where Holloway had stood, there was a stone pillar. It wasn't just a pillar. It was a statue of a man in a concierge uniform, holding a set of keys, his face set in a permanent stoic expression. He was holding up the ceiling. I placed my hand on the cold stone of his boot. Thank you, Thomas, I whispered. I went back upstairs. The hotel was waking up. Guests, living, breathing, wealthy guests, were coming out of the elevators, dragging expensive luggage, complaining about the Wi-Fi. They had no idea. They had no idea that hours ago, a bellhop was burning in the hallway, or that a bride was drowning in room 404. I walked behind the front desk. I put on the blazer. It felt heavier than before. I picked up the manual. The cover had changed. It no longer said protocols for the night watch. It simply read manager's log. I opened it. The pages were blank, waiting to be written. The phone rang. I stared at it. It wasn't the internal line. It was an external call. But then the second line lit up. Internal. Room 404. The bride was awake. I looked at the clock. It was 11 a.m. Why was she active? The rules said she slept during the day. Then I realized. Sterling was right. I had destroyed the old contract. The old rules were dead. The containment was broken. The ghosts weren't gone. They were just unregulated. I picked up the receiver for room 404. Front desk, this is Julian, I said, my voice steady, authoritative. The water. It's gone. The wet voice gurgled. I'm thirsty. I'll have housekeeping bring up a humidifier. Ma'am, I said calmly. And I'll send up a bottle of our finest saline solution. But you must stay in the room. If you leak into the hallway again, I will have to charge you a cleaning fee. There was a pause, then a satisfied gurgle. You are kind. New boy, I'm the manager. I corrected her. I hung up. I looked out at the bustling lobby, the luxury, the opulence, the facade. It was all a stage. And now I was the director. I picked up the pen, the fountain pen that sat where Holloway's quill used to be. I opened the ledger to the fresh page. Rule 1. I wrote in fresh, black ink. Respect the staff. We are the only thing standing between you and the basement. I signed my name. The psychological toll of that night didn't leave me. It just changed shape. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I dream of static faces and burning keys. I still work the night shift even though my title says manager. I can't leave. I tried to walk out the front door once just to grab a coffee across the street. As soon as my foot hit the pavement, I couldn't breathe. My lungs seized. I am tethered to the Ethelgard now just as much as the Weeping Bride or the Burn Bellhop. But there is a difference. I'm not a victim. I'm the warden. The unwritten contract of the Ethelgard is simple. The hotel demands a soul to run it. It tried to eat mine, but I made it choke. Now we have an understanding. I keep the monsters fed. I keep the guests oblivious, and the hotel keeps me alive. So, if you're ever in New York and you find yourself walking down Fifth Avenue late at night, you might see a building that doesn't quite fit. You might see a man in a midnight blue suit standing in the window, watching the street with eyes that have seen too much. Don't come in. We have a strict dress code. And trust me, you don't want to know what the penalty is for violating the unspoken rules. Besides, we're fully booked. The dead don't check out, and they take up all the best rooms.